Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Streamline English. I hope you are having a peaceful day. Find a comfortable place to sit or to lie down. Let your shoulders drop. Take a slow breath in and gently out. You do not need to understand every single word tonight. Just listen. Follow the sound of the story and let the English wash over you like a gentle wave. Tonight, I want to take you to the coldest, whitest, loneliest place on Earth. Imagine a ship made of wood. A strong, beautiful ship sailing south towards Antarctica, the great frozen continent at the bottom of the world. Now imagine that the sea around the ship begins to freeze. The water turns to ice, and the ice begins to squeeze the ship, slowly, like a giant hand closing. There is no radio. There are no phones. No one in the whole world knows exactly where the ship is, and there are 28 men on board. Can you imagine being the leader of those men? Can you imagine them all turning to look at you, cold, frightened, and far from home, waiting for you to bring them back alive? His name was Ernest Shackleton, and this is his story. If you enjoy learning English through calm, true stories like this, please subscribe to Streamline English. It truly helps our little channel grow, and it keeps these stories coming. Thank you, my friend. Our story begins in Ireland, in the year 1874. Ernest Shackleton was born into a large family. He had 9 brothers and sisters. When he was a boy, the family moved to England. Ernest was not the best student in school. He found his lessons boring, but he loved to read. He especially loved stories of adventure, of the sea, and of faraway places. While other boys dreamed of safe and comfortable jobs, young Ernest dreamed of the horizon, of what lay beyond the edge of the map. The horizon is the faraway line where the sky seems to touch the sea or the land. At the age of 16, he left school and went to sea. He worked on sailing ships, traveling around the world. The work was hard. The sailors were tough men. But Ernest learned something important on those ships. He learned how to lead. He learned how to stay calm when others were afraid. And he learned that he, more than anything, wanted to do something great. Something no one had ever done before. In those years, the very beginning of the 20th century, there was one great prize left in the world of exploration, one place that no human being had ever reached. The South Pole, the exact bottom of the planet, in the center of frozen Antarctica. Many brave men wanted to be first, and Ernest Shackleton wanted it too. Everyone has a horizon, a dream that pulls them forward. The question is whether we are brave enough to sail towards it. But the South Pole was not a gentle place. It was the most dangerous place on Earth, and it would test Ernest Shackleton in ways he could never have imagined. How far would one man go, chasing a dream made of ice? It was the early 1900s. Antarctica was almost completely unknown. On the map, it was mostly empty white space. No towns, no roads, no people. Just ice, mountains, and wind. Wind so cold it could freeze a man in minutes. Shackleton went south for the first time as a young officer, on an expedition led by another famous explorer named Robert Falcon Scott. An expedition is a long, organized journey, usually to explore a difficult or unknown place. On that first journey, Shackleton and 2 others walked further south than anyone had ever gone before. But Ernest became very sick. He grew weak. He had to be sent home. For a proud and ambitious man, this felt like a deep failure. He had been so close, and his own body had stopped him. But Shackleton did not give up. A few years later, he led his own expedition. This time, he and his men came within about 180 kilometers of the South Pole. closer than any human had ever been. They could almost see the prize. And then Shackleton made a decision that tells us exactly what kind of man he was. Their food was almost gone. To continue would mean reaching the pole, but probably dying on the way back. To turn around meant giving up the greatest prize on earth when it was nearly in his hands. He turned around. Later, he said to his wife a line that people still remember today. He told her that he thought she would rather have a live donkey than a dead lion. In other words, better to come home alive and ordinary than to die as a hero. It was a brave and humble choice. Shackleton understood something that many explorers forgot. The lives of his men mattered more than glory. But the South Pole was still calling, and soon another explorer, Roald Amundsen of Norway, would reach it first. The prize Shackleton had dreamed of was gone forever. So Shackleton dreamed an even bigger dream. If he could not be the first to the pole, he would do something else, something enormous. He would try to walk all the way across Antarctica, from one side to the other, straight through the South Pole. No one had ever crossed the frozen continent. He found a ship. He gave it a perfect name, Endurance. Endurance means the power to keep going, to suffer and continue, and never give up. He could not have known how completely that single word would come to define his life. It was the year 1914. Shackleton gathered his crew, 28 men in total, including himself. They were sailors, scientists, a doctor, a cook, a photographer, and even a young man who hid on the ship as a stowaway because he wanted the adventure so badly. A stowaway is someone who hides on a ship to travel secretly without permission. The Endurance sailed south into the freezing seas around Antarctica, and there, the sea itself became the enemy. The ocean was filling with ice, great floating sheets of it, called pack ice, that pressed together into a frozen desert. The Endurance pushed forward through the ice, slowly, carefully, but the ice grew thicker, and then, one cold day, the ship could go no further. The ice closed around it on every side. The Endurance was stuck, frozen in place. It's like, as one man wrote, an almond stuck in the middle of a chocolate bar. At first, the men were not too worried. They waited for the ice to break apart and set them free. They played games on the ice. They cared for their sledge dogs. They even played football on the frozen sea. Shackleton kept everyone busy, kept everyone together, kept everyone calm. But the ice did not let go. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The whole frozen ocean was slowly drifting, carrying the trapped ship with it, further and further from where they wanted to be. And then the men began to hear a terrible sound. The ice was moving, pressing, groaning, squeezing. The pressure of millions of tons of ice began to crush the wooden ship. The Endurance creaked and cried out, like a living thing in pain. Sometimes in life, the thing we built to carry us is the very thing we must learn to let go. Shackleton stood on the ice and watched his beautiful ship being slowly broken, and he understood. The Endurance was lost. They would never sail home in her. They were now 28 men, standing on floating ice, at the bottom of the world, with no ship, no radio, and no hope of rescue. What on earth do you do when there is nothing left but ice? The Endurance finally sank beneath the ice in November 1915. The men saved what they could. 3 small lifeboats, some food, tents, and supplies. They watched the masts of their ship disappear under the frozen sea. Now Shackleton faced the hardest job of his life. He had only one goal now, not the South Pole, not glory, not crossing the continent. Just one thing: to bring every single one of his men home alive. They made a camp on a large, flat sheet of ice. They called it Ocean Camp, and later Patience Camp. And there they waited, living in tents on the floating ice, hoping the ice would drift towards land or open water. Imagine that life. The cold was beyond anything most of us can picture. Their clothes were never truly dry. Their food was running low. Beneath their feet was only ice, and beneath the ice, the deep, dark, freezing ocean. At any moment, the ice could crack open under them. And through all of it, Shackleton was everywhere. He talked to the frightened men. He gave the weakest, the warmest places, and the most food. He noticed when a man was losing hope, and he stayed close to him. He kept the mood as light as he could. The men gave him a nickname. They called him the Boss. Not out of fear, but out of trust. A true leader is not the one who never feels afraid. A true leader is not the one who carries hope for everyone else, even when his own heart is breaking. For months, they drifted on the ice, and finally, the great sheet of ice began to break apart beneath them. They could wait no longer. They climbed into their 3 small lifeboats and pushed out into one of the most dangerous oceans on the planet. After days of freezing, exhausting rowing, they reached a small, empty, rocky place called Elephant Island. For the first time in nearly a year and a half, the men stood on solid ground. But their joy did not last. Elephant Island was a bare rock, far from any shipping route. No ship would ever pass by. No one would ever find them there. They had reached land, but it was a dead end. If help would not come to them, then someone would have to go and find help, and the only way to do that was almost impossible to imagine. Shackleton looked at the map. The nearest place with people was a whaling station on an island called South Georgia. It was about 1,300 kilometers away, roughly 800 miles, across the wildest, stormiest ocean in the world. To get there, they would have to cross that ocean in one tiny, open lifeboat, just 7 meters long, through giant waves, through freezing storms, using only the stars and the sun to find their way. If they missed the small island, even by a little, they would sail out into the open ocean and die. It was almost certainly suicide, but there was no other choice. Shackleton chose 5 men to go with him. They strengthened the little boat as best they could and named it the James Caird. They left the rest of the crew on Elephant Island, sheltering under the 2 remaining boats, and promised to come back for them. What followed was one of the greatest journeys ever made by human beings. For about 16 days, those 6 men sailed their tiny boat across mountains of water. The waves were as tall as buildings. The cold soaked into their bones. Ice formed on the boat, and they had to chip it away so it would not sink them. They were always wet, always freezing, always exhausted. They took turns trying to sleep in soaking sleeping bags while the others fought the sea. Their navigator, a man named Frank Worsley, had to find a single small island in a vast ocean, using only quick glimpses of the sun between the storms. One tiny mistake in his calculations, and they would all be lost. And then, after 16 days, they saw it, land, the black cliffs of South Georgia, rising out of the sea. They had done the impossible. But the ocean had one last cruel trick. A storm drove them away from a safe landing. For hours they fought to stay off the rocks. At last, exhausted and half dead, they landed on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station, and safety, was on the other side, across high mountains and frozen glaciers that no one had ever crossed. So Shackleton and two of his men did the only thing left to do. With no proper equipment, almost no sleep, and screws from the boat pushed through their boots to grip the ice, they walked. For about 36 hours, without stopping, they climbed over the frozen mountains in the middle of the island. And finally, they came down the other side, and they heard a sound they had not heard in nearly 2 years. The sound of a steam whistle, calling men to work at the whaling station. They were 3 filthy, frozen, bearded men who looked barely human. They walked into the station. The first people they met did not recognize them as the famous explorers the world believed were dead. Sometimes the people who have traveled the hardest roads are the ones we least expect, quiet, worn, and carrying a strength we cannot see. But Shackleton was not finished. His men were still waiting on Elephant Island. He had made a promise. Shackleton tried again and again to sail back to Elephant Island to rescue the rest of his crew. 3 times, the thick sea ice blocked his way and forced him back. 3 times, he refused to give up. On the 4th attempt, in a borrowed ship, he finally broke through. As the ship approached the island, he counted the tiny figures on the shore, desperately, one by one. Were they all still alive? Had he come too late? He counted them all. Every single man was alive. For 4.5 months, those men had survived on that bare rock, eating seals and penguins, sheltering under 2 upturned boats, never knowing if the boss was alive, never knowing if anyone was coming, and they had kept each other alive, holding on to the belief that Shackleton would keep his promise. And he did. Think about what had happened. Their ship had been crushed and sunk. They had drifted for months on floating ice. They had crossed a deadly ocean in tiny boats. They had sailed 800 miles in an open lifeboat. They had climbed frozen mountains. They had survived nearly 2 years in the harshest place on the planet, and not one of the 28 men had died. By the measure of his original dream, Shackleton had failed completely. He never crossed Antarctica. He never reached the South Pole. He did not plant a flag or break a record, but he brought every one of his men home alive, and the world has never forgotten it. Maybe the greatest success is not reaching the place you dreamed of, but the way you care for the people who walked beside you. Ernest Shackleton went back to the cold places he loved, and he died a few years later, in 1922, near the icy seas of the far south. His men remembered him for the rest of their lives as the leader who never let them go. And now, I want to bring this story gently back to you. You may not be crossing a frozen ocean, but you are on your own long journey too, the journey of learning English. And some days, that journey can feel like the Endurance, frozen in the ice. You study and you work, and it feels like you are not moving forward at all. The words feel too hard. The progress feels too slow. But listen to me, my friend. You have not stopped. You are here, right now, listening to this story in English, until the very end. That is your endurance. Every word you understand is one more step across the ice. You do not need to cross the whole ocean today. You only need to keep going, slowly, gently, one day at a time. And like Shackleton's men, you are not alone. We are all on this journey together. So before you go, please give this video a like. It helps more learners find these calm stories. Subscribe and join our little crew so you never miss the next one. And leave me a comment. I would truly love to know, do you think Ernest Shackleton was a failure because he never crossed Antarctica? Or was he a hero because he saved every single man? What do you think? Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Take a slow breath, be proud of yourself for listening, and I will see you in the next story.